Śrīmad Bhāgavatam, text 27. Vaikrutastraya evaite deva sargascha sattama vaikārikastu yah proktaha kaumaras tubhayatmakaha Vaikrutastraya evaite deva sargascha sattama vaikārikastu yah proktaha kaumaras tubhayatmakaha Vaikrutastraya evaite deva sargascha sattama vaikārikastu yah proktaha kaumarastu ubhayatmakaha Translation. Vaikrutaha, creations of Brahma. Trayaha, three kinds. Eva, certainly. Ete, all these. Deva sargaha, appearance of the demigods. Cha, also. Sattama, O good Vidura. Vaikārikaha, creation of demigods by nature. Tu, but. Yaha, which. Proktaha, described before. Kaumaraha, the four Kumaras. Tu, but. Ubhayatmakaha, both ways, namely Vaikruta and Prakrit. O good Vidura, these last three creations and the creation of demigods, the 10th creation, are Vaikruta creations, which are different from the previously described Prakrita natural creations. The appearance of the Kumaras is both. Text 28 and 29, translation and purport by Srila Prabhupada. The creation of the demigods is of 8 varieties. The demigods, the forefathers, the asuras or demons, the Gandharvas and Apsaras or angels, the Yakshas and Rakshasas, the Siddhas, Charanas and Vidyadharas, the Bhutas, Pretas and Pishachas, and the superhuman beings, celestial singers, etc. All are created by Brahma, the creator of the universe. Purport, as explained in the second canto of Śrīmad Bhāgavatam, the Siddhas are inhabitants of Siddhaloka, where the residents travel in space without vehicles. At their mere will, they can pass from one planet to another without difficulty. Therefore, in the upper planets, the inhabitants are far superior to the inhabitants of this planet in all matters of art, culture and science, since they possess brains superior to those of human beings. The spirits and jinn mentioned in this connection are also counted among the demigods because they are able to perform uncommon functions not possible for man. Om Jnanatimirandhasya Jnananjana-shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapidam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupaha Kadamaiham Tadapi Swapadantikam Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Śrīmate Bhaktivedanta Swami iti namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Vancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhyevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasati Gaura Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna. So today we discuss the concluding sections of the Bhagavatam's description of creation. And in this talk, I'll primarily focus on we have discussed the purpose of creation as is understood by science, the Abrahamic traditions, and by Bhagavatam in our first class. In the second class, we discussed about the nature of the difference between humans and animals. Now, here in today's class, I will focus on the conception of life as it exists. Here the Bhagavatam talks about so many different varieties of life forms, whereas the mainstream scientific understanding is somewhat different. And we will look at the approaches towards acquiring knowledge which causes differences. And we'll see whether these differences are reconcilable or not. So here, the Bhagavatam describes that there are two kinds of creations, Prakrita and Vaikruta. So, Prakrita primarily refers to the evolution of natural elements, whereas Vaikruta refers to the creation of biological forms of the different species. So, Prakrita means that which is related with Prakriti. So, now, from the empirical observation, we can find that there are essentially two components in existence. There is matter and consciousness. Now, the scientific approach has always been to begin with matter and then to try to agonize or try to speculate how consciousness came about. And although that is the mainstream approach, there are even scientists who have questioned the validity of this approach. For example, I think it is Pascal or was it Kelvin? He said, one of them, he said that, we try to speculate how consciousness came from matter, but we might well be like a person who has lived throughout one's life in darkness. And then when such a person suddenly comes to light, that person starts thinking, how did the darkness produce light? So, the point is, we move from our experience to that which is beyond our experience. And that is the natural way in which knowledge will grow. But when we move from darkness to light, at that time, it may well be that we are moving not from cause to effect. It is not that light is produced from darkness. the relationship between the two may be not just of cause and effect, but it may be a categorical difference. That the two are two distinct categories of objects in existence. Or now in the case of light and darkness, of course, it is that the absence of light is what is darkness. So the modern scientific approach is largely matter-centered. Now try to look for material explanations of things. And this is not necessarily because science has an anti-religious or anti-God bias. No, that is just the operational methodology of science. At least most versions of science. And scientists have their reasons for saying that don't bring anything supernatural, don't bring any soul, don't bring any God into the picture. So, we'll discuss the reasons and the validity, and also where those reasons no longer are valid. So, for example, in Europe, in the medieval ages, around 15th, 16th century, there was a black plague. Now, it took a toll of almost somewhere between 1/3 to 1/4 of the population of Europe at that time. So now there were shamans, false priests, and all those different kinds of people. Some of them said that, what is the cause of this plague? They said maybe there are some evil spirits. There are some evil spirits who are causing this black plague. The scientists give this as a standard example. They say, if science had accepted that supernatural explanation, that the black plague is caused by evil spirits, then we would not have been able to identify the germs which caused the plague. We would not have been able to develop medicines, and we would not have been able to cure the plague. So often they argue that bringing in supernatural means explanations beyond the natural. Bringing in supernatural explanations into the world of science will lead to stopping the progress of science. And therefore, they say we should look for natural explanations for natural phenomena. So, for example, their argument would be, if Newton had just been satisfied, oh, how are the planets moving? They are moving because God has arranged it. So, if we had just accepted God as the answer, then we would not have understood the law of gravity. And we would not have understood the laws of motion. And we would not have been able to make all the automobiles which are there today. So their argument is that bringing supernatural explanations acts as a stopper of scientific progress. And that's why we should not bring any supernatural explanations. Now, this has its validity, and we shouldn't think that even in the Vedic culture, people did not look for natural explanations. So, for example, there is a whole branch of Ayurveda, and Ayurveda doesn't say if you got a stomach upset, some demigod is upset with you. And if you got a stomach upset, Ayurveda also gives you some practical medicines, and those medicines are made of natural products. So, for natural causes, for natural phenomena, natural causes are found, and the natural counters or natural cures are prescribed. So, it is not that the Vedic scriptures are jumping for supernatural explanations for every small thing that is happening in nature. So natural causes are also recognized, and they are also dealt with adequately. But the question that the Vedic scriptures ask us is that, are natural explanations a complete explanation? They are a part of the explanation. Are they the complete explanation? It means, see, nobody argues that if God is acting in this world, yes, Srila Prabhupada tells us that all our senses are controlled by demigods ultimately. Everything is controlled by demigods. But it is not that the demigods have to intervene by supernatural means. They can act through natural means also. They are the controllers of the natural phenomena. So they don't have to intervene by some supernatural means in the functioning of natural mechanisms. So here, often, this is a subtle point, and to explain this, I'll give a related example. There is one approach which religionists use for trying to prove the existence of God. And that approach can turn out to be a mistake. What is that? Sometimes some religionists, they point out to all the things that science has not yet explained. They say, science doesn't have answer for this, science doesn't have answer for this, science doesn't have answer for this. And therefore you need God. So, when many times religionists posit God as the explanation for the unexplained. Now, this is not a very sound approach, because what science has not explained today, it may find an explanation tomorrow. And because of this, even when faith in God is made dependent on the unexplainable in science, then when science explanations expand, then the room for God starts decreasing more and more. And then skeptics call this as the God of the gaps argument. That means there are gaps in our knowledge, and you say that those gaps require God to explain. But then as the gaps in our knowledge will decrease, then there will be no more space left for God. So now, this is not a sound approach to say that we need God to explain the unexplainable. No, actually, God is the explanation for explainability. I'll explain what I mean by this. God is the explanation for explainability. That means that, yes, we are able to find natural causes for natural phenomena. But who created the system by which causes produce effects? So now, what we are saying here is not that just God causes the planets to move. Scientists may say, no, God doesn't cause the planets to move. There are certain mechanisms which cause the planets to move. There is a law of motion, and based on the law of motion, the law of gravity, these are what is causing the planets to move. That's fine. What we are asking is, there can be a mechanism, but who set that mechanism? So this is not the same as what is often called as the design argument. This is a much deeper philosophical question. See, one of the characteristics of this universe, as is described in the Bhāgavatam, in the Ishopanishad, is Purna. Om Purnamadaha Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate. So the absolute truth is complete, the world is complete. And whatever comes from the complete is complete in itself. That means that from the functional point of this world, God does not have to intervene at every moment to set things that go wrong to set them right. Now, Prabhupada himself said, good management means that everything seems to be managed and nobody is running around doing the management. And systems are set up so well that things move smoothly, and you don't have, do this, you've not done that, do that. You don't have to run around. That is efficient management. So Krishna has created systems like that. Now those systems involve demigods. Those systems involve even his presence as the supreme controller. And he is the supervisor. But he does not need to intervene in a supernatural way at every moment. The world operates according to laws. And those laws are created by God. So the question is, if we say, a very common strategy for, in debates, a very common strategy for defeating your opponents is to misrepresent their arguments. That is called in logic as straw man argument. A straw man argument means what? Suppose you have to go and fight a boxing match with a big, very well-built boxer. You don't have the strength to fight with him. So you get to create a straw representation of that. And he's pound it. And he's knocked out and see, I have defeated him. So that is called a straw man argument. So misrepresent the opponent's argument so that it seems very weak, and then knock it out. And then see, I have defeated you. So when atheists say that bringing God is a progress stopper, now they are misrepresenting what scriptures tell us, what Bhagavatam tells us. Bhagavatam doesn't say that God intervenes at every single moment and supervises him. He supervises, but that supervision is more of observational. Udasina vadasikam. He's situated as if detached. So, Krishna has created mechanisms for how the system works, how material nature works. And the mechanisms are created in such a way that they are Purna. So, if we Now, the conventional design argument was that the specific designs in this world are made by God. Now, many times when we use this argument, we use two arguments together. We say design requires designer, law requires lawmaker. That means, say, if a rose is very exquisitely designed, that design must have come from God. If there are Newton's law, if there is Mendeleff's law, if there are so many laws, those laws must have come from a lawmaker. Now, these two arguments we use in parallel quite often, but they are not the same argument. In fact, the second argument can be used to counter the first argument. Laws require a lawmaker can well be used to counter design requires a designer. What do I mean by this? If there is a well-made pot, then you can say this pot requires a potter. But if we create a mechanism, a machine, say by which a wheel moves at a particular speed, the wheel is arranged in such a way that a certain amount of clay goes into it, and a certain amount of oil goes into it, a certain amount of other adhesives or whatever is required goes into it. Then by that mechanism, the unit may produce pots. And then the specific design of the pot is not coming from a designer. The design is coming from a law. That law is, okay, you put in this much ingredients, you put this, get it to move at this speed, the pot's design will emerge. So, the law, now the question which we are raising, when I said that God is, so when I said earlier, when religionists try to argue that God is the explanation for the unexplained, what that means is, okay, certain pot's design is so complicated that it could not have come by a mechanism. So we say this must have been caused by God. But in what about the remaining? Is the remaining not caused by God? And then if science finds a mechanism for this, then we'll say that is no longer caused by God. What we are saying is God is not the explanation for the unexplained. God is the explanation for explainability. Explainability means, okay, this pot is coming out by this system, but who set the system? The scientists themselves don't have an answer to this question. Where did the laws of nature come from? Okay, if the universe exploded in the beginning through a big bang, and that's how everything came about, then the question comes up that matter was just disorganized. So if the matter was disorganized, what made that matter obey certain laws? The matter just came out of explosion. Why should that matter obey any laws like say F is equal to gm1 m2 upon r square, Newton's law is equal to mc square, Einstein's postulation. So why should that obey that? So that means the scientific and the scriptural explanations don't necessarily have to be contradictory. In some cases, they may be contradictory. That is a special case, but that's not the point. The point is, scripture is addressing issues at a deeper level than what science does. Science looks for material causes for material effects. Scripture asks the question, what created the system of material cause and effect? So, who or what is responsible for the system of cause and effect, which we try to analyze. That's why sometimes if we unnecessarily position science and scripture as in confrontation, then we alienate a lot of people who have faith in science and who are benefited by science. And we may end up seeming hypocritical also, because we also use the products of science. So, there are definitely certain scientific principles which work. That's why I say, for example, we are using loudspeaker, I'm using a laptop. Now, there are devotees who are hearing this lecture on radio. So, to say that scientific knowledge is wrong is also incorrect. It's because it works and we ourselves use it, so it will be hypocritical. So, we don't have to inherently position science and scripture as opposite. The point is that they are offering explanations at different levels. Science with its material methodology. Material methodology means with its methodology of looking for material causes for material effects. Science cannot go to ultimate causes. It cannot just go. Although some scientists may make some statements about the ultimate causes, but those statements are not scientific. They are statements coming from their own philosophical biases. So some scientists may prove, okay, this theory proves that there is no God. No theory can prove that. Because science studies only material phenomena. And God is not a material object. So science can never disprove God. It's like, to give a simple example, if somebody goes for fishing, and that person uses a net for fishing, which has, say, 1 centimeter holes in it. So then what is going to happen is, anything that is small, all the fishes that are smaller, all the creatures in the ocean that are smaller than 1 centimeter, they are never going to be caught by that net. So now that fisherman may put in the net and keep it for maybe 100 hours there. And he draws it out and he says, I didn't find a single fish that was smaller than 1 centimeter. Therefore, I conclude that all the fish in the ocean are bigger than 1 centimeter. No, the methodology was used in such a way that the approach, the net is such that it cannot look for anything smaller than 1 centimeter. So like that, science cannot make any ultimate statements about the existence or non-existence of God. But by looking closely at what science shows us, we can make inferences. So the question where the system of material cause and effect, where the laws came from, that has no answer within science. For that, we have to look beyond science. Now that brings us to, with this background, let's look at now this particular statement. But the Bhāgavatam is saying that in the universe, there are so many different life forms. There are Siddhas, there are Charanas, there are Devas, and there are all these living beings. Now, scientists may say that, we have used our space, we have used our telescopes, we have used our astronauts, we have gone outside, we have not seen anyone over there. So, now this is first of all, a very simplistic understanding. If we look at the Mahabharata, if we look at the Ramayana, even at the Bhagavatam, there are many incidences we will see that the Devatas, if they appear also, that unless the Devatas grant vision, the humans are not able to see the Devatas. So, generally when fire sacrifices are performed for satisfying certain Devatas, at that time, there are 2 levels of fulfillment of those sacrifices. That means the king will sponsor the sacrifice, the priests will perform the sacrifice, and then as the smoke goes up, and then the priest, when the whole fire goes on unimpeded, then the priest will say that yes, Devatas have come. If there is no impediment in the sacrifice, that itself is an indication that the Devatas have come and accepted the sacrifice. Now, in some cases, when the Devatas are very pleased, at that time, they may make themselves visible. They may grant their vision. And Arjuna is going around making preparations for the Rajasuya Yajna, which Yudhishthira wanted to perform. So the 4 Pandava brothers went in the 4 directions. Arjuna went to the north. And he went up the Himalayas, and when he came to a particular point, at that time, he came, it is said, to the area which began the area of the celestials. And the celestials, they stopped me. Arjuna, you are a human, you cannot go any further. And he said, he heard an invisible voice, he couldn't see anything there. And then further they said that even if you are able to go by the force of your arm, still you will not see anything. Because the celestial regions cannot be perceived by humans. So the point which I am making is, when the Bhāgavatam states that there are life of different forms, that form is not just referring to biologically different form. Yes, that is there, but it is also constitutionally it is made of different materials. So the Devatas have bodies which are made of subtle matter. And those bodies cannot be seen by us. Also, sometimes if we have a too simplistic understanding of what the scriptures are teaching, we misrepresent the complexity of scripture. I'll give 2 examples to this. For this, first is, say, people, wherever people believe in heaven, they say that heaven is up. Now, people in Australia say heaven is up. People in Europe say heaven is up. If the earth is round, up is in 2 different directions. So, which is up? So, that up, when we say heaven is up, or Krishna says, urdhvam gachanti sattvastha, those who are in goodness go up, that is not a simplistic geographical up. That is a karmic up. No, when we say the heavenly planets are higher, it is not that, it's like upper story and lower story building. It's not as simplistic as that. Although sometimes, because we want to depict things in 3 dimensions, things may be depicted like that. But it is a karmic up. A karmic up means that souls who have done better karma, they go to heavens. And correspondingly, they who live in heavens over there, they have different kinds of bodies. Their abodes themselves are different. So, as I said, the point is, if we look at scripture very simplistically, then we misunderstand what scripture is teaching and we misrepresent it to others. And intelligent people say, you people believe in mythology, pre-scientific mythology. But that's not true. What scripture is talking about is much more sophisticated. Similarly, when we say, for example, yajna produces rains. Now, this in principle is true. But we have to also understand what the principle is. Now, does yajna produce rains? Does it mean, literally speaking, that as devotees, we don't accept the mechanism by which rains are produced? Is it that, say, ocean from the ocean, say the sun takes in water, forms clouds, and the clouds, they move because of wind, and the clouds condense and rains come? Is it that we don't accept that? No, obviously we accept that. The Bhāgavatam itself gives so many places examples of how a charitable person is like the sun, who takes in water from the ocean and then showers the water on the places where there is no water. So the Bhāgavatam also exhibits an awareness of this basic natural phenomena. And yet, the Bhāgavatam also says that yajna produces rains. So the point again is that the natural explanation is not rejected. The Bhāgavatam is saying that there is something more than the natural explanation. The natural explanation is not rejected, but it is complemented. Now for this complementary, so if we start saying, we believe that you play some kartals and sing some sound and that is going to produce rains. Yes, we do accept that, but there is a principle underlying that. And if we don't explain that, we will open ourselves to ridicule. So what is the principle? The principle is that this universe is not governed by chance. And we are expected to live in harmony with the higher forces that are there in the universe. So just like at one level, I can say, how does rainwater come? Or how does water come in my house? I turn on the tap, the water comes. Now the child may say, I turn on the tap, the water comes. That's true. But the mother may say, no, you have to go to the water supply board and you have to pay a bill over there. A child may say, you say this water supply board, I don't see any water over here. It's simply office. So, and you are giving some money over here. What does this money got to do with the water that is coming through the pipeline? Now, to a superficial vision, there may seem to be no connection. Now, when the mother tells the child that the water is coming because we pay the bill, now she is not rejecting the fact that the water is going to come through a pipeline, through a tap. The two explanations are complementary. They are not contradictory. They are not exclusive. So, when we pay the bill to the water supply board, what we essentially are doing is, we are harmonizing with the principle of governance, with the way the water is going to be supplied. So there is a mechanism by which the water comes, that is the pipeline. But along with that overseeing that mechanism is a system. And we have to cooperate with that system also. So yajna, fire sacrifice, is not as an explanation, as a substitute for the mechanism by which rains come. It is an addition. That yes, how do clouds move from here to there? Where do clouds condense? How do the rains exactly come out? Where will they come out? All this is controlled by higher beings. And when we chant Hare Krishna, it is not, or when we do yajna, it is not that we are just uttering some sound vibration. That sound vibration is actually a means by which we express our willingness to harmonize with the cosmic government. In a sense, we pay our cosmic dues, we pay our taxes. And therefore, we then both explanations have to work in parallel. Now, even if I pay my water supply tax, but if the pipeline is broken, then the water will not come in my house. The pipeline also has to be fixed. But just the pipeline being fixed, the pipeline will be perfectly functioning, but if I have not paid the bill, water will not come. So there are many times when what happens is that over many areas, clouds come in the sky. And the clouds have water, but the clouds don't rain only. Just stay there. Just sometimes for hours, days, weeks the clouds are there in the sky, but the rains don't come. And then finally when the clouds start condensing, suddenly some wind comes and the clouds go elsewhere and the rain falls elsewhere. So the point is that the material mechanisms themselves, they are an explanation, but they do not alone determine where exactly rains are going to come. So there are multiple factors involved. So the two explanations are complementary, not contradictory. I'll give one example and then I'll conclude with the topic of further one more little bit elaboration on extraterrestrial life. So, conceive a billiards board. On a billiards board, there are balls of various colors and there are players who are hitting with sticks. Now when they hit with sticks, then as far as the movement of the balls on the billiards board, we can say all of it is determined by the laws of mechanics. Now why did this ball go into this hole? Now because this player or this particular stick hit it at this angle and then this angle caused the ball to move like this and the ball moved like that and that hit over there. Now from the point of view of mechanics, that's a correct explanation. But if we were watching the billiards board from an overhead camera where we saw only the balls and the sticks, then we would say that's all that there is. But if you are watching the billiards game, we will see that behind the sticks there are hands and those hands belong to players and those players are hitting the balls with precision, with the right angle, right force and right accuracy, and that's how the balls are going in. So the mechanics that is there, that does not contradict the skill of the player. The laws of mechanics are an explanation and the skill of the player is also an explanation. And both these explanations are complementary, not contradictory. So similarly, the natural mechanisms for explaining natural phenomena, that is an explanation. And the Devata supervising, ultimately Krishna being in control, Maya Adhyakshena Prakriti, that is also an explanation. Now the Bhāgavatam at many places states that Krishna is inconceivable. What to speak of Krishna, even Atma is achintya, it says. That means it is not that the Atma can simplistically be perceived. If I just open the heart and look, do I see a soul over there? No. We won't be able to see a soul like that. So the explanation that the Bhāgavatam gives of God and the system of demigods, that is complementary to whatever is found by science. It is not contradictory. Now coming to extraterrestrial life. So when science says that we have not found any life forms anywhere else, this operates on a presumption. The presumption is that all life has to be the way we know life to be. Now when scientists actually research other planets, what do they actually look for? No, it's not that they comb every single millimeter on every celestial object to see whether there is life or not. What they look for is whether what is required for sustaining life, such as equitable temperature, oxygen, water, whether these are present or not. But if you look at the characteristics of Atma described in the Bhagavad Gita, the Atma is completely spiritual. And it is not damaged by anything material. Nainam chinnanti shastrani, nainam dahati pavaka, na chainam kledayantyapo, na shoshayati marutaha. Nothing material can damage the Atma. That means the Atma can exist in any material environment. And it can get a body that is appropriate for that material environment. So now, for extraterrestrial life, I made 2 points. First is that Devatas have bodies, or Devatas or other beings, they have bodies that are not visible to us. So that's why with our instruments we may not find them. And secondly, in principle, the soul can exist anywhere. And it will get an appropriate body for that environment. So again, the scientific approach we accept it. Science, with its methods, has not found life on other planets. But that, to extrapolate from that and say that there is no life on other planets, that is not a scientific statement. That is a value judgmental statement which goes beyond what science can tell us. So when the Bhagavatam says that the universe is populated with different kinds of beings, it is talking about different levels of existence. And at these different levels of existence, different beings exist with different kinds of bodies, which may not be observable according to our perceptions. So when science operates, see, often we tend to think of all science as equally credible. Now sometimes we may say that, okay, science works in very impressive ways. I just type something on my computer or even my handset, on my cell phone, and somebody millions of miles away gets the message within a fraction of a second. It can be very impressive. And the science has developed this. It's so impressive. Then if science says there is no God, there is no soul, then how can I disagree with that? Scientists are very intelligent people. How can I disagree with that? So now there are two important points to recognize in this. First is, not all science is equally authoritative, because not all science uses the same methods. What do I mean by this? See, there are certain phenomena which are constantly happening in nature, which are observable and experimentable. For example, Newton's laws of motion. Or for example, if you go into medicine. In medicine, there are bodies, and you put, say, this medicine into a body, or in this particular biochemical environment, it produces this result. We can do hundreds of tests, thousands of tests to experiment that. So these are phenomena which happen repeatedly and they can be observed. And most technology that we have is based on science study of observable and repeatable phenomena and its postulation of mechanisms thereof. That means we observe hundreds of times, we do experiments, based on that we come up with a mechanism. And then we conclude certain things. And here science has phenomenal strength. But when science goes towards questions of origins, then science cannot use this approach. So the approach where science makes many observations and then it makes inferences based on those observations, then it makes experiments. So this is called the method of induction. Induction means, I make 100 observations and then I extrapolate from that. That if 100 times I dropped a ball and it fell down. So 101st one time also, when I drop it, it will fall down. That's a reasonable extrapolation. It's a reasonable inference. The science uses this for repeatable, observable phenomena. But when we go back to history, when we go back to questions of origin, science cannot do anything repeatable or observable. If the universe came about by an explosion as science proposes, and nobody was there around to observe it, and nobody can repeat it. You cannot create a new universe by explosion. So, when science tries to find explanation for things in the distant past, there is no possibility for observation, experimentation, repetition. Science uses another approach which is called as abduction. It cannot use induction in this. Abduction normally means kidnapping, but that is not the meaning over here. Abduction is a kind of philosophical reasoning, wherein abduction, scientists basically progress like an investigator in a whodunit novel. That means, for example, say a person in a house was murdered. Now, if there was no security camera in the house, the investigators cannot tell a murderer, you please come back and murder once again so that we will know who did it. They can't do that. So how do investigators find out? They try to eliminate various explanations. So they say, okay, we had a security camera at the entrance of the house and there are only 3 people who went in. So one person was a small child. That person could not have had the strength to put in a knife and kill this person. The other person who went in was a 75-year-old lady. She also could not have had the strength. And the third person was a young man of 25, and we observed 3 days ago that he had a very heated argument with this person. So then they may conclude that, okay, this person is our prime suspect. So now it may seem a reasonable inference, but by no means is it a certain inference. Because we cannot repeat that. Now, some other investigator may come and find out. Now, Sherlock Holmes stories are so popular because Sherlock Holmes comes up with some other alternative explanation which other people don't think about. So now you may not know that there is some secret trapdoor in the house, in some corner behind some cupboard or somewhere like that, and a thief came in from there. Now, based on the investigators' evidence, whatever they investigated, this person who came in, the third person who came in from the door, he's the prime suspect. But he may be completely innocent. So the point is that when we use abduction, we can never be sure of a certain conclusion. And the very nature of the data that we observe depends on certain assumptions. The assumption here is that, okay, the only entry point to this house is this door. But what if there is some other entry point which they don't know about? So abduction is at best a speculative explanation. So when scientists go to origins and they try to answer question about origins, they always have to use abduction. They cannot replicate the event that happened long ago, and they cannot do repeated experiments to find out. So that's why we should not assume that when a scientist says that there is F is equal to gm1 m2 upon square, when scientists talk about Newton's law of motion, and then scientists say that everything came from nothing. Both are not equally credible, because both have been arrived at by different methodologies. And one methodology is credible, the other methodology is speculative. It is questionable, highly questionable. So that's why I'll conclude this with one last point, that it is not that as devotees we have to constantly position science and scripture as in conflict. Scripture offers us an explanation at a different level, at a more fundamental level as compared to science. And when they do seem to contradict, that time also, it is not that science is at its best. Science at its best is a phenomenal tool for acquiring knowledge, but not all science is equally credible. And there are ways in which an intelligent devotee can use scripture for knowing what is the purpose of life and aspiring to achieve that purpose, and use science as a means for living in this world, for moving towards that purpose. So that way, even in the Vedic times, there was science of a different kind. If you look at the various astras and those things that I talked about, there are science of a particular kind. So Arjuna did not hesitate to use that. So as devotees, we can also use that. But we don't have to see them necessarily as contradictory. And where they are contradictory, we can look so that there are intelligent answers by which we can get a balanced understanding. So to summarize, I started by this theme which we are talking about is the Bhagavatam talks about Prakruta and Vaikruta, the emergence of nature and the emergence of natural elements and the emergence of consciousness. So I started by talking about how science assumes that things begin from matter. But that is like a person who has lived in the dark, assuming that everything comes from darkness. So when that person sees light, the question that person asks is, how did light come from darkness? So scientists assume that everything begins from matter, and then they might ask, where did consciousness come? How did consciousness come from matter? But the fundamental assumption itself is questionable. Then we discuss about how God is not the explanation for the unexplained. God is the explanation for explainability. So we don't say that God is the cause for every effect that we see in this universe. No, there may be material systems of cause and effect. And as I said, Ayurveda also acknowledges these material systems of cause and effect. But the question that we ask is, who set up the system of material cause and effects? So if things operate according to laws, then how did the laws come about? So scripture looks for a fundamental cause underlying the cause-effect connection chain and the laws for that which science investigates. So scripture goes at a deeper level of explanation. And then we discussed about further how they are complementary, not contradictory. We discussed the example of, say, yajna producing rains, or several other examples like that. And the explanations of the billiards board example, they're complementary, not contradictory. And when they seem to be contradictory also, then at that time we have to know that we are not critiquing science per se, nor is scripture asking us to reject entirely the scientific methodology. What it is science is not equally authoritative in all its branches of knowledge. So, extraterrestrial life, when scripture talks about, it is talking about life of a different kind. Science is not, that kind of life is not even in the horizon of science. That which is having different kinds of subtle bodies and appropriate bodies for environments which science can't conceive how life is possible over there. And of course, those biological forms are invisible of the higher beings. So, and lastly, I conclude by talking about difference between abduction and induction. How science may be very reliable when it is able to observe or repeat experiment. But when science goes to origins, at that time it does not have the capacity to observe repeatedly, to experiment repeatedly. And that's why its explanations are very speculative. And scripture goes to the ultimate causes and gives us the knowledge of those ultimate causes. So thank you very much. Grantharaj Śrīmad Bhāgavatam ki jai. Any questions? Yes, Prabhu.
Thank you. Now the theory of intelligent design says the pseudo-scientific explanation for things which are not explainable scientifically. And we understand that the creation came about as the Lord himself so desired. So it's not entirely causeless. You recently explained the earthquake in Nepal on the basis of the application of karma.
Okay.
And that we see at times various natural phenomena are centered around only certain parts of the world. So how do we extrapolate the theory of intelligent design for the Lord's desire onto such localized natural phenomena?
Okay. So the question is that according to intelligent design, it is God who has designed things, at least certain features in the universe. And ultimately scripture also says that everything happens by God's desire. Now God's desire, would it not, whatever is done by God, would that not be universal? But then we see that there are certain things that happen in specific locations, like an earthquake happened in Nepal. So if there are certain localized phenomena, then how do we connect universal causes with localized events? Is that your question?
Yes.
Okay. So firstly, the principle of karma, which we talk about, is naturally variable locally. Because different people have done different kinds of karma. So, for example, first talk in scientific language, the law of gravity applies whether it's earth or on heaven or on moon. But in F is equal to G m1 m2 upon r square, the value of G on earth and on moon will be different. And it will be different on Jupiter, it will be different at various places. So, even within the arena of science, although there are certain laws which are claimed to be universal, but still there is variability which is also acknowledged. So with respect to specific causes, then we have to look again when we say that earthquakes are caused by karma. So this is, again, has to be very carefully presented. This is not meant to contradict the natural explanation. That there are epicenters of the earthquakes, there's a shifting the earth's tectonic plates, and there's a seismic disturbance which causes earthquakes. That is a natural explanation. And we accept that natural explanation. But the question is the natural explanation the complete explanation? See, there is something which is correct and there is something which is complete. So the correct is not always the complete. There is a difference between the correct and the complete. To say that this billiards ball went into this hole because the stick hit it with this precision at this angle, that is correct explanation. But that is not the complete explanation. So we accept that there are certain seismic phenomena, there are certain seismic factors which cause earthquakes. That is the correct explanation. But what we also say is that why do certain things happen only at certain places and not at other places? That is because of the individual karma of the people at that place. And therein lies the complementary explanation. And even in medicine, we will see, for example, medicine finds out, okay, if you have this disease, take this medicine. But there are when doctors say what they will call as medical miracles or medical anomalies. They say that sometimes seems to be ordinary disease, and you give medicine, and no matter how much medicine is, the person just doesn't seem to get cured. It may not happen all the time, but it has happened sometime. And there are some people, who are declared to be incurable, and suddenly they get cured. So these are definitely exceptions, but they do happen. So these exceptions point to the fact that the natural explanation is not always the complete explanation. So now, what the localized variation in such phenomena is because there are specific factors locally involved. So certain people have done certain karma, and because of it, they are getting the reactions. Now, important thing is, generally speaking, when such earthquakes happen, we have to be very sensitive. Whether we start talking about karmic factors or not, that has to be seen according to time, place, circumstance. Now, see, our goal is ultimately to attract people towards Krishna. And explanation for events, intelligent explanations can attract people towards Krishna. But, what will attract people to Krishna more is also a sensitive human approach of caring. So, for example, if we just say, those people who died in the earthquake in Nepal, they were all sinful people, they just got their karma back. That would be monstrously insensitive. And we don't see such an approach in scripture. In the 4th canto of Śrīmad Bhāgavatam, when the citizens come to Prithu and they say there's a terrible famine and we are all starving, they very poetically say that just as animals may be burned in a forest fire, we are being burned by a digestive fire. So at that time, Prithu Maharaj doesn't tell them, you are suffering the results of your past karma. He takes action to correct the situation. So similarly, we too our goal should not just be, when such events happen, to just give an explanation. We should be wanting to help. And where an explanation helps, we can offer an explanation. But if our goal is somehow if people feel that our goal is not to care for people, not to help people, our goal is to somehow maintain our belief in the correctness of our philosophy. Somehow I want to prove that I am right. Then that can be very alienating. Because we come off as very insensitive. When the Nepal earthquakes happened, the famous Christian evangelical preacher, he said, this earthquake is God's wrath. And now it is the responsibility of Christians to make sure that all the temples of the infidels that were destroyed should not be rebuilt. God has destroyed those temples for us, so we should ensure that it should not be rebuilt. It's horrible. It's terrible to make such statements like this. So what we should focus on is to see how best we can attract people to Krishna. So offering humanitarian help at that time with a devotional intention, that is a way we may be able to attract more people than by trying to give a philosophical explanation that. Now some people have philosophical questions and we can give a philosophical explanation. But the philosophical explanation needs to be given with sensitivity. Because an important point in understanding the principle of karma is, when we have to deal with other people, we don't know what they have done in their previous life. And we are meant to deal with people based on their this life actions. So, if a person comes to a king and says, this person robbed me, this person swindled me, and the king says, it's your own karma, then there will be no justice left. The king has to deal based on this life's factors. So from this life's factors point of view, yes, those people who became casualties or who became bereaved in the earthquake, from this life's perspective, they are victims. And it's our duty to help them. So if an intellectual explanation can be used to help, that's good. If humanitarian aid can be used to help, that's also important. Whatever way we can help at that time and create a pathway for those people to come to Krishna, we should do that. Does that answer your question? Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. I'd like to know, in regards to the extinction of, several species of animals because of deforestation, or for example, we hear dinosaurs are not there anymore, or lions of a particular kind are going away from the earth. So it seems it's because of the ecological imbalance. So when such animals are disappearing, then does that mean that those desires, because of which they got that body, are they something around that?
So the question is that certain species are said to have become extinct because of certain ecological factors. Does that mean that if every species represents a means by which the soul's particular desire can be fulfilled, and if that species is no longer existent, does it mean that there are no souls with those corresponding desires now? What exactly has happened? No. Firstly, the Puranic taxonomy, the Puranic system of classification of species, is not restricted to Earth. So, with respect to Earth, it may well be that certain species may have become extinct. But that does not mean it has become extinct everywhere else in the universe. It may be existing somewhere else. And the souls who have that kind of desires are manifested over there. So just like, say, there is a company, this is a global cloth manufacturing company, which manufactures thermal wear. Now, suppose it is summer in Australia. Now it is winter. Suppose it is summer. Then that company may not provide any supplies over here. And we may say, maybe this company has got bankrupt. It's over now. It is not existing only. But that company is still existing. That company is still producing thermal wear. And thermal wear will be available in the northern hemisphere, where there is a need for it. So the circumstances don't determine the existence, but circumstances may determine the availability. So like that, depending on specific ecological circumstance, certain biological forms may no longer be manifest. But those souls who have those desires that correspond to those biological forms, they will be given bodies elsewhere in the universe. Okay. Yes,
Prabhu, more in relation to your yesterday's class, I was having a discussion with someone, and he was trying to make this point, and just wanted your comment on that. He was saying that, just like how you like pizza, similarly a hog likes stool, and so he says, and then some other higher beings might like something else. What's the problem in seeing hog liking something that you don't like? Because it's not your food anyway, it's their food and they're liking it. So what's wrong in it? And like, basically, in other words, it's no problem in that situation.
Okay. So the question is that different species will have different likes according to their specific situation. So if a hog likes stool, now that is its liking, and we humans have different liking. Different species can have different likings. So if it's all relative, so what's the problem with something being relative like this? See, this question comes from an implicit acceptance of a philosophy which can be called as metaphysical relativism. Relativism means basically everything is relative. Metaphysical relativism means there is no absolute truth. Everything is relative. So now, at a philosophical level, although metaphysical relativism seems quite appealing, that works for you, you believe that. That works for you, you believe that. Everything is relative. But then, metaphysical relativism says everything is relative. There is nothing absolute. This is also a view, isn't it? You may say there is there is nothing absolute. But then, is the statement that there is nothing absolute an absolute statement? Or is that also relative? So, we may say the belief in an absolute truth is a relative statement. Or it's a relative belief. But the rejection that there is no absolute truth, it is also a relative statement, in the sense that it is a statement made by some people. So metaphysical relativism is ridden with self-contradiction. It's like somebody saying, I can't speak even one word of English. Now, I already spoken 7 words to speak this. So, like that, there is no absolute truth is already a statement of absolute truth. Because this is a statement you are saying is absolute. It applies to everyone else also. So the point is that applying this to this principle of metaphysical relativism to the situation, the question of hogs eating stool. See, beyond this material world, there is a spiritual world where there is absolute reality. And in the spiritual world, what happens, based on that, there are absolute standards of what is desirable, what is undesirable. And reflective to that, there are certain things which are desirable, which are undesirable. So, the point of this example, when we say that a hog is eating stool, see how abominable it is. The point of this example is not to condemn a hog for eating what is naturally its own food. That is not the point. It's not that, when Prabhupada says, see how abominable life of hog is, it eats stool. Prabhupada never said, that we should stop all hogs from eating stool. No, nobody makes a mandate like that. So yes. So yes, naturally, that is their prescribed food and that's what they're going to eat. But from the point of view of a soul who is eternal, a soul who can delight eternally in pure love for Krishna, can have such a sublime taste. The contemplation that material nature can distort its taste so greatly that which is normally considered abominable, the soul can accept even that. So often this particular thing is also told in the relationship with Indra. Once Indra was cursed and Indra became a hog. And when Brahma came and wanted to tell him, now you can come back to Indra, he says, no, I'm happy. I've got a she-dog, I have got she-hog, I have got piglets, and every day we eat fresh stool. We're happy here. So the purpose of the story is to show how Indra, who was enjoying celestial delights, but when he got into a hog's body and he got so attached to that pleasure that he was not ready to give it up. So the point of this is that, just because of habituation, we may get attached to something which is trivial, something which is really not worthy of us, and for that we may give up something which is far more glorious. So yes, a hog will eat stool and that's its natural food. But the point is, a soul who has the capacity to delight eternally in pure love for Krishna has now become reduced to such a situation where it has to eat such food and survive and seek joy in that. So this is the level of degradation the soul has undergone, and this degradation is reversible. The soul purification can get elevated and come to the far purer and far greater level of enjoyment. So we are not condemning the hog itself. The point is to give it as an example to illustrate the degradation to which the soul has fallen and how the soul should reinstate itself in a higher spiritual position. Did I answer your question?
Yes.
Yes, Prabhu.
Chaitanya, I have got one comment and one question.
Yeah.
The comment is, I had a question. I asked so many religious people that why we have to serve Lord. They could reply. Only Srila Prabhupada, Hare Krishna could say why we have to. So that we develop a connection and we didn't know about absolute God itself. But now we know because of Srila Prabhupada that we can have connection with Krishna and by chanting and holy name and doing all the correct things, following the four everything. Now my question is, in medical field, as you know, there is a lot of problem about antibiotic resistance. Like in India, tuberculosis is so common. Now they have got such resistant bacteria that we have no solution. We are trying this, that, everything. So, is it because of karma or something else? If you can explain this resistance to various medicines.
Okay. So the question is that we develop medicines for certain diseases, but then the bacteria, what the causes for that, they also develop resistance to the medicines. For example, the TB, what they call is MTBR, multi-treatment resistance TB is there, and it's almost incurable. So how do such things happen? Or why do such things happen? The first point is that yes, ultimately it's karma. The nature of material nature is that there will be three kleshas. So one of them is adhyatmic, the klesh that comes from the body and the mind. So there's a doctor, I think René Boy, he wrote the book called Health in the 21st Century, The Future of an Illusion. So what the theme of that book was, its theme was that science claims to have cured many diseases, and medical science seems to have done remarkable work. And that is true in terms of eradicating certain diseases. But he also points out that most of the diseases that science claims to have eradicated, they are also products of certain socio-cultural, socio-economic conditions. And when those conditions change, those diseases, their incidence naturally decreases. So for example, now science may have claimed that we have eradicated the plague. Now that is true. But then the plague was also more likely to be prevalent when there is a socio-cultural situation where there are a lot of rats. Now, for example, there is an agriculture-based civilization where there are grains and there are rats who go in, or the industry-based situation where there are rats which go around over there. So the eradication of plague cannot be attributed only to medical science. There are also certain socio-economic conditions that come up which promote certain diseases and which make certain diseases no longer likely to happen, less probable or more probable. So yes, we may have eradicated certain diseases, but certain diseases, like now there are cancers. The sheer incidence of cancers which we have now is far greater than it was in the past. Even stress and various other diseases like that. So the point is that because disease is a particular klesha, is one of the kleshas, it is inevitably going to be there. So yes, that disease is going to be there doesn't mean that we as doctors don't try to find cures for it. That is our human duty. Because it's like, in any kingdom, there are going to be thieves. And the presence of thieves is also, in one sense, it's a karmic factor. But that doesn't mean the king shouldn't have systems of protecting citizens. That's the king's duty. So, at one level, if medical science thinks that, with the progress of science, we will conquer nature, that is an attitude which will never come true. Yes, we will cure one disease and some other disease will come up, or like in this case, the same disease will morph into some other form and it will become more complex. So as devotees, we see this as an example of how we will never be able to conquer material nature, ultimately. And that's why the solution is that we need to transcend material nature, rise to spiritual consciousness and attain Krishna's kingdom. But at a functional level, if we are in the field of medical science, then we should use the best treatment available as a part of our service to humanity. So we are not in principle against scientific research. Yes, because that's, in today's world, medical science is doing what in the past Ayurveda was doing. Now if some people can use Ayurveda, some people can use allopathy, that doesn't matter. It will vary according to time, place, circumstance. But in principle, there is this understanding that we will never be able to conquer material nature. And even through science, we can see this. We may conquer one particular manifestation, but it will some other problem will manifest some other way. So the ultimate solution is adhyatmic, that we have to raise our consciousness and become liberated. But practically, we can do whatever is required to find treatments. Does that answer your question? Yes, Mataji.
Prabhu, you mentioned how the subtle beings, they don't have the gross bodies. But isn't it the inferior material nature comprises of earth, water, ether, fourth super mind? So that doesn't come in all beings, whether it's a subtle or gross.
Okay, good question. So, and I said that they say the beings in heavens don't have bodies that are visible because their bodies are subtle. So, isn't it that all the elements, earth, water, fire, ether, mind, aren't all of them present in all bodies? Not necessarily. At the very least, what Bhāgavatam says is that Brahma has a body made of intelligence. Now, what exactly is intelligence and how it will form four heads, how it will form nose? And this is something which we may not be able to conceive. But the point is that even if we see there are gross elements, it's not necessary that all the gross elements have to be everywhere in exactly the same form that we see us. It's like water can exist, water here is visible. But if water is existing as water vapor, it's not visible. It's still water only. So like that, even the elements can comprise bodies, and even if they are present, they can be present in forms where they may not be visible. So for example, there is a mystic siddhi by which some people, at least there are some references, not very common, where people can become invisible. So even people who have earthly bodies can sometimes become invisible. So in the Mahabharata there is described that, or even especially in the Ramayana, Indrajit, when he was attacking the Pandava, Ram and Lakshman, he at one point became just invisible and he was just shooting arrows from above. And then when Lakshman, they had a final fight, Lakshman said, Indrajit boasted that, I defeated you twice, I'm going to kill you now also. So Lakshman said, cowards, only cowards need to be invisible to fight with their opponents. So he says, now your end is going to come. So the point is that Indrajit at that time, Lakshman was able to see Indrajit. But earlier, Indrajit had used some mystic powers and he had made himself invisible. So now, how does this invisibility happen? We may not know the specific mechanisms, but we can understand the principle. See, this universe is like it's not a product thing which has come about by chance. There is ultimately universal governance. So, suppose you have a computer. In a computer, you may have different levels of access. There may be an administrator who has access to all the files. There may be a user who has access to only a particular drive in the computer. Now, if that user is using the computer, at that time, it is as if the other drives don't exist only. Although those drives are there and the data is there, but the access is not given to that user over there. And that's why the user is able to see only a particular set of things. So like that, we have been given certain senses by which we are able to perceive only certain things. Whatever is appropriate, whatever is necessary for our functioning in this world. And we don't have the access to perceive other things in the universe. And that is why there are things in the universe, that means there may be bodies even made of gross forms, which we may not be able to perceive. And when, say, Indrajit appeases some devata, and by that he gets some mystic power by which he can make himself invisible. That means, he places his body in another level of reality to which the normal human senses don't have access. So, there are two possibilities here. One is that the body could entirely be made of subtle elements. The other is the body is made of gross elements, but they are arranged in such a way that our senses no longer have access to perceiving them. Does that answer your question? Yes. Okay. Yes, Prabhu.
May I ask, we heard from the Vedic scriptures that the earth is a jiva and has a personality. So, but in the same time, from the scientific point of view, earth is a combination of many jivas. So the question is, once we have complex systems, like for example a solar system, is this also a jiva, or the jivas, they only elementary? So once there is, if we see some complex system, does it necessarily it's a living being like that, or the living beings, they only elementary? Does it make sense?
Yeah. So the question is, the earth is thought of as a planet basically, according to modern cosmology. But then earth is thought of as a jiva, a female, who's often in trouble and then she goes to heavens or whatever for asking for relief. So what is it exactly? And secondly, that if the earth is a jiva, there is the solar system also a jiva, or where all is it a soul present, and where is it just a system of organization, a particular system of material elements or material things. Now, nobody denies that the earth is a geographical thing. Even in the Vedic times, it's accepted. That's why there are kings who fight. I want to conquer this part of the earth. It's geographical territory, it's definitely there. But the question is it a geographical territory alone? Now, there are as far as I have understood, there are two distinct ways in which correlation happens. One is when we talk about Surya and Surya Dev. Sun is a celestial body. And then there is a predominating deity. And that deity will change. It's a post, just like Australia may have a head of state, and that will change. So, again, this does not mean that Australia as a country does not exist, but it also has a head of state. So, like that, both are existing. There is a head of state, and then there is a state of which the head is there. There's a geographical area, there's a celestial body in the case of sun. Now, the other correlation is in the case of rivers. For example, when you say Ganga is a river, the correlation is Ganga the predominating deity of the water body? That is generally not the way the correlation is thought about. That is what applies to Varuna. Varuna is the predominating deity of all water bodies. And Varuna is a post which changes, the water bodies stay added. But when it comes to rivers, it does, the way the Puranas describe it, it is that the rivers themselves, they are both goddesses, and the goddesses have dual forms. That means the goddess, she has a feminine form, and she also has another form which is in the form of a river. So it is something like particular souls have, based on their karma, given certain powers by the Supreme Lord. So one kind of power is jurisdiction over a particular area. So Surya Dev is given jurisdiction over Surya. But with respect to rivers like Ganga, the Ganga itself is a person, and Ganga also is the river. Now, how exactly that happens, that the scriptures don't really explain to us. It will be difficult for us to understand. Now, these are the two broad systems of correlation that are there in the Puranas. Now, which of these applies to earth? I have not come across any categorical statement. Means whether the Bhumi Devi is a predominating deity of the place called earth, or Bhumi Devi herself manifests through earth. That is something which I feel that we'll have to do more study for this. Another Prabhu, you would like to add anything on this?
Just a comment. The scientific community in the meteorological field have used an El Nino effect in the Pacific Ocean to determine whether we're going to have a drought or not. Right? And it's been consistent. But now we have an El Nino for the last couple of years, but it's still raining. So that now their system of observation and then that being the cause of an effect, it worked okay before, but now it doesn't work. So there are obviously other factors that influence it. So it's just to support what you're saying, that process of, observation of natural phenomena doesn't always reveal all of the causes that are working in the universe. They're just looking at a narrow range of that phenomena. Right? Then something else comes along and affects it and they go, ooh, okay, we've got to rethink this.
Yeah.
And so it's not a fully reliable system. Because as we know, we give patients medicine and sometimes they die.
Yes.
There are other factors, and when you can't see the other factors, it's your assessment of the situation is necessarily unreliable or not the full picture.
Yes. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Grantaraj Śrīmad Bhāgavatam ki, Śrīla Prabhupada ki, Gaur Bhaktivedanta ki, Jai Gaur Premanande.